I am Lotika Singha, and with my colleague Shruti Bala, I thank you on behalf of International Solidarity for Academic Freedom in India, INSAF India, for joining us today in intersectional solidarity at this time of ongoing genocide in the occupied Palestinian territories. Let us pause for a moment to remember all those killed in Palestine and Israel. Thank you. INSAF India is a collective that campaigns against assaults on academic freedom in India, including attacks on academics and scholars from marginalized backgrounds. We believe that academic freedom is inextricably linked to social justice and that knowledge production is bound to the fostering of our social selves and academic freedom as a collective right. This webinar is a safe space, and we request all attendees to be mindful of this while posting comments. If a participant posts comments that are discriminatory in any way or against the spirit of intersectional solidarity, we will have to remove you from the meeting. I will now hand over to Nandini Sundar from IAFN.
Thank you all for attending this meeting. The India Academic Freedom Network is a platform for students, faculty, all those concerned with academic freedom in India. And we started in March 2023, and the idea is to be able to provide solidarity to academics who have been targeted in any fashion by the state or by vigilante groups in civil society, to hold discussions on issues of academic freedom. We've had 3 meetings so far, and given the importance of this current moment and the way that across the world academic freedom is being silenced, we were very happy to hold this jointly with INSAF. So thank you. Nivedita?
Greetings and solidarity to all of you who are present here today. The question that we are considering here today, the ongoing genocide in Palestine, forces us to ask ourselves why this issue is relevant to our concern for academic freedom. This is because worldwide there is a massive clampdown on the intellectual freedom to explain and understand Israeli settler colonialism and the 75-year-old Palestinian resistance. Students have lost job offers for signing petitions calling for ceasefire. Academics, journalists, and writers have been forced to resign from their jobs. Funders of universities have pulled funding to punish university authorities for not preventing student and faculty protests at the Israeli state's decimation of the Palestinian people. In Indian universities, talks on Palestine are either not permitted to be held, or organizers and speakers are targeted by social media trolls, government agencies, and university administrations. It is a global conspiracy of censorship that has acquired unimaginable proportions. Today, our distinguished panel will open up some key issues for discussion. I will introduce each speaker as they come up to speak. We begin with May Abu Mogli, a Palestinian academic. She's a researcher and educator. She has a PhD in human rights education from University College London. May's work focuses on critical approaches to human rights education, teacher professional development in crisis and emergencies, refugee education, and decolonizing research and higher education. May is senior researcher at the Center for Lebanese Studies. Welcome, May. I hand over the floor to you now.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for all your solidarity and for having me today. With all that is happening in Palestine, the genocide that is taking place in Gaza, the ongoing ethnic cleansing, land grab, home demolitions, and the unspeakable violations that we've seen on TV against the released political prisoners and their families in the West Bank and Jerusalem in the past 2 days, it's difficult to focus on education. But I believe, like all Palestinians, education is one of our tools to struggle for freedom of the land and mind. And I hope this would be a start, just a start for a long conversation about Palestine and hopefully sustained solidarity until liberation. Education for Palestinians is as fragmented as the geography of Palestine. And this is as a result of settler colonialism for over 75 years. To understand education for Palestinians, it's important to understand that education is a primary target for the settler colonial project. Education is perceived by the colonizer as a threat, as it can enhance critical thinking, allow for building networks, communities. It can create spaces for raising political consciousness and transmit the values and tools of and for liberation. So education spaces and institutions are regularly attacked in Palestine, not only as physical institutions, but in terms of curricula, archives, and all Palestinians as humans involved in the education processes. Yet, education has been one of the main tools to be used by Palestinians to struggle against the colonizer. For example, during the first Intifada, which is the Palestinian uprising, which started in December 1987, education was criminalized by the Israeli occupation. For example, Birzeit University, where I did my undergraduate degree, was closed for 4 years by a military order. Against this illegal and unjust military order, Palestinians vowed to continue educating their youth. And so they created teaching and learning spaces in their homes, churches, mosques, and community centers. But these Palestinians were risking imprisonment as a result, as these education spaces were labeled by the occupation army as cells of illegal education. The struggle for education is also present among Palestinian political prisoners in Israeli prisons. One of the early hunger strikes that was conducted by Palestinian political prisoners was to claim their right to education. They demanded a library, time to conduct classes, and ability to sit for school and university exams. They have succeeded. However, as oppressive and punitive measures, the Israeli colonial authorities weaponized this right and used it against the Palestinian prisoners, where they would ban them from conducting any education-related activities and confiscate their books, pens, papers, notebooks whenever they want. And normally that's a reaction to resistance that's taking place inside or outside of prison. Now that we're talking about political prisoners, Palestinian political prisoners, according to Defense for Child International, before October 7, because everything seems to be surrounded around October 7, well before that, Israeli forces detain, interrogate, and imprison 500 to 700 Palestinian children between the ages of 12 and 17 each year. Before the latest prisoners' release, there were 250 children in Israeli prisons, 26 of which are in administrative detention. And that means they're held without trial and with no time limit. Palestinian children, when tried, they're tried in military courts and are mostly charged with throwing stones with a sentence that can go up to 20 years. Those children lose all their rights, including the right to formal education. Now, I started with pointing out that Palestinian education is fragmented. And I highlight this because when I'm asked about education in Palestine, I'm expected to talk about the West Bank and Gaza. And that is not the reality. Palestinians live across Palestine, river to sea. And I always want to include also Palestinians in the diaspora, refugees and exiled, those Palestinians who were forced out of their lands and who are more than 50% of the Palestinian population. So there are more Palestinians outside of Palestine than inside. And this is as a result of the mass expulsion of Palestinians in 1948. But unfortunately, I know that today we won't be able to talk about that. So today I will just talk about some of the experiences of those who live in Palestine, river to sea, with a focus on higher education. And I will start with the Gaza Strip. In the Gaza Strip, there are 19 higher education institutions, including 2 main universities, the Islamic University of Gaza and Al-Azhar University. Since the start of the attacks on Gaza Strip in this October, education has been suspended across all 19 higher education institutions, impacting over 88,000 students. Both the Islamic University and Al-Azhar University have been completely destroyed. Israeli military assaults on Palestinian educational infrastructure is not a new phenomenon. The Gaza's Islamic University has been bombed before in 2008, 2009, and 2014. And out of the 20,000 Palestinians killed in Gaza, and many more are under the rubble, and that the number is estimated to be around 7,000 Palestinians. Thousands are university students and academics, but we do not have the exact numbers yet. The Gaza population is very young. Over 50% are under the age of 18. Over 75% of the 2.2 million Palestinians in Gaza are refugees. Over 6,000 of those killed are children. The Ministry of Education announced the end of the school year in early November, as many of the classrooms have no children left. But also back in 2009, the term scholasticide was coined to describe Israel's targeting of educational institutions following the destruction caused by the Israeli military aggression called Operation Cast Lead on the Gaza Strip. Now, in the occupied West Bank, there are 32 higher education institutions with around 140,000 students. The Israeli occupation army systematically target Palestinian university students for arbitrary arrest and detention. This practice, amounting to a form of collective punishment, violates the Palestinian students' rights to education, freedom of association, assembly, and expression. Each year, the Israeli occupation authorities arrest and detain dozens of Palestinian students, often under the pretext of involvement with student groups deemed illegal under Israeli military orders. So basically curbing their ability to have any political engagement or agency. The attacks on university campuses, students, and academics have intensified since the 7th of October. For example, Dar el-Kalima University in Bethlehem said in a statement that the academic community in Palestine is under a stifling siege. Birzeit University has been raided repeatedly. Students were arrested from campus, and the Students' Union was ransacked by the army. Al-Quds, or Abu Dis University, is cut in half by the Israeli illegal apartheid wall and is regularly attacked by Israeli military. The stifling of academic freedoms in Palestine also includes the cut of funding by donors or partnerships with other universities globally avoided due to the claims of the Israeli authorities that the Palestinian curricula incites violence or that it is anti-Semitic. Those are unfounded and false allegations. Academics from abroad who would like to work with Palestinian academic institutions or Palestinian academics or students are denied visas or deported by the Israeli occupation, which limits the connection of Palestinian academics and students with their peers and colleagues internationally, and limit their ability of knowledge production and bridging that knowledge and sharing it. Palestinian students and academics have to regularly cross the hundreds of checkpoints in the West Bank, where they are delayed, humiliated, shot at, arrested, and sometimes killed. Some students and academics are barred from traveling, which curb their ability to continue their studies or participate in conferences. Many are arrested and interrogated on the way back home at the completely Israeli-controlled borders. So if we get to travel, we are questioned about our activities abroad. So Palestinian education is one of the main targets of the Israeli settler colonial project that not only aims to physically remove the Palestinians, but also to curb and end their ability to produce knowledge in the hope to achieve Palestinian epistemicide. Beyond the West Bank and Gaza Strip, Palestinian students who live in Jerusalem and those who live and study in Israeli universities that are built, some of them are built on mass graves. They're built on Palestinian lands occupied in 1948. These students face similar violations to their academic freedoms and freedom of expression. One of my colleagues who teaches at one of these universities told me, and I quote, "What we are experiencing is like we have handcuffs on our throats, an iron fist in our mouths. We are unable to talk, post, or simply show emotion. We're being surveilled 24/7. We can lose our jobs, get arrested and tortured, possibly lose our IDs for simply scrolling through social media," end of quote. What my friend is experiencing is not new. It has been happening for decades, where Palestinians who live in Jerusalem and Palestinians with Israeli passports experience heightened surveillance and continued effort by the colonizer to detach them from their Palestinian identity and surrounding. However, this has intensified again lately as the Israeli parliament passed an amendment to their counterterrorism law that introduces the consumption of terrorist material as a new criminal offense, which means if you scroll through social media and watch the news, that will be considered a criminal offense. As a result, and as of the 31st of October, more than 100 Palestinian students from at least 25 universities inside of the Green Line, which people call Israel now, have been told to suspend their studies. Many receive death threats on social media. Another example that's connected to academics' freedoms. Towards the end of October, Professor Nadira Shalhoub-Kovrikian, who works at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, signed a global petition. A lot of people, including some of my colleagues at UCL, have signed it. And the petition was entitled, "Childhood Researchers and Students Call for Immediate Ceasefire in Gaza." As a result, a letter was sent to her from the university administration. The letter stated, and I quote, "By doing so, as in by signing the petition, Professor Shalhoub-Kovrikian had committed an act that is not very far from crimes of incitement and sedition." The letter concluded by the sentence, "We, as in the university administration and leadership, are sorry and ashamed that the Hebrew University includes a faculty member like you. In light of your feelings," so she's persecuted for her feelings, "we believe it's appropriate for you to consider leaving your position at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem," end of quote. Now, these are some reflections of the experiences that are happening in Palestine, some to my close friends and colleagues. And I know this all sounds very grim and difficult and impossible to deal with. But there's so much to be done, and Palestinian academics and activists have given us plenty of tools to use. For example, in 2021, Palestinians issued the Manifesto of Dignity and Hope, where the Unity Uprising was taking place. We also called it the Intifada of Consciousness. Palestinians called for ridding ourselves from the shackles of fragmentation, seeing and working with Palestinians as a whole and not as divided groups dictated by the Oslo prison and the illusion of the peace agreements and the two-state solution, which is in effect an apartheid solution. In the same year, a statement by Palestinian academics from across the world called for the rejection of the sanitized language of conflict to describe decades of Israeli dispossession of Palestinians and colonization of Palestinian land. They also rejected the two sides narrative that obscures the inherent power asymmetry between the Israeli colonial entity as a major military colonial power and Palestinians resisting structural colonial violence. And here I would add that with everything that we're witnessing currently, we need to be very aware of the manipulation of the media through language that is further dehumanizing Palestinians, where we see words such as dead instead of killed. Palestinians don't just die in their thousands. They are killed, and we need to name the perpetrator. Where we also see words such as children used when it's about Israeli children, but teenagers or people under 18 when they are talking about Palestinian children. This is a technique of unchilding and further dehumanizing Palestinian children. So we need to be very critical and wary when we are consuming information, particularly when it comes from mainstream media that is part and parcel of this ongoing genocide by its incitement and dehumanizing language against and of Palestinians. Also, using language that claims neutrality and impartiality is very harmful. This language is not only damaging and dehumanizing, but it also obscures the current reality of genocide and entrenches a racialized politics of denial, which, if we do not fight against it through our intellectual and academic work and connected solidarities, we risk that it will be normalized and used systematically against all struggles for justice and liberation. These struggles will be easily framed as what's happening in Palestine within safe, generalized language and depictions of universalist humanitarianism, charity, saviorist language and work, obfuscating the politics of ongoing colonialism and white supremacy. When working on Palestine, Palestinian scholarship and voices need to be centered, as failing to do so would contribute to the systematic epistemicide of Palestinians. And finally, Palestinians continue to pledge support for the academic boycott of Israeli institutions and the broader boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. Now, based on these ideas, Palestinians have laid down for everyone the concepts and actions that can be used for solid forms of solidarity. Solidarity that is neither performative nor conditional, but that unmasks the ongoing relentless colonial violence, not only in Palestine, but wherever the struggle for justice and liberation is taking place around the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, May, for bringing to us both the grim, despairing situation and the decision to resist under liberation. Thank you for bringing us Palestinian voices. Thank you for bringing us the messages of defiance from Palestine. And intifada of consciousness is something that I will take into my heart, because that is what Palestine is. Thank you so much, and to the Palestinian people. I now move on to the next speaker, Professor Achin Vanayak, who's a professor of, he is formerly a professor of international relations at the Department of Political Science, University of Delhi. He has co-authored and edited several books ranging from studies of Indian political economy, secularism and nationalism, to those on foreign policy, as well as on international affairs and nuclear disarmament, regional and global. He has twice served on the board of executives of Greenpeace India and was on the 1994 government-appointed expert committee set up to evaluate and report on the National Literacy Mission of India. Achin was also recently in the news for having spoken on Palestine at a university in Delhi, which led to the Israeli ambassador writing to the authorities of that university, the university asking Achin Vanayak to apologize, which he did not. And later a talk at Bombay that was scheduled for him was also cancelled. So this is the level of control of speech that a foreign country is able to exercise in. Achin,
thank you very much for inviting me to this important forum. And thank you, Mia, for a very moving and important presentation of what's happening in Palestine. Let me start by saying that all governments, especially those that are moving more and more in an authoritarian and anti-democratic direction, and I include among these governments, of course, those that are designated as liberal democracies. All of them want two things, all these governments. One, they want to have maximum freedom to decide and have whatever policies they want, domestic and foreign, without facing resistance from civil society or pressure in terms of shaping those policies. The second thing that governments want is that their policies should be accepted in civil society and become accepted as a kind of norm and fine. And how do they do that? Well, it's a question of organizing consent in one of three ways. You have, of course, what's called bought consent. So you give carrots to different sections of society to support you in various ways. You use the stick, you create fear. And that's something that is very, very disturbing, because it means that the route towards that involves controlling the judiciary. And in India, and unlike most other liberal democracies, the Supreme Court is so supremely powerful that if you can influence the Supreme Court, it goes all the way down. And use of fear there is also a very important mechanism. But apart from the question of passive consent or bought consent, they also want to generate active consent, endorsement, support for their perspectives, which means that they try to move in the direction of ideological homogenization, in which, of course, the two most important institutions are the media, print, electronic, and, of course, the social media. And in India, you have organized troll armies connected to the ruling party and, of course, the whole forces of Hindutva in a way which is very serious. And of course, the educational institutions, schools and colleges and universities. That's very important. So what's happening here on the Palestine-Israel issue here? You have, of course, your public institutions, which are of two types. One, central institutions, and second, state universities, central universities and state universities. In the central universities, everywhere in the state and central universities, even private, one kind of nexus is common to all, and that is a nexus between certain category of students who bought in to the ruling ideology and framework, certain sections of the faculty, and then comes the question of the administration. So where you have central government universities, changes in the personnel, the VCs, the vice chancellors, other administrators, etc., reinforces the ability of them to control and to decide what happens. And of course, what happened in the case of the latest struggle in Palestine and the conflict between Israel and Palestine is that in central universities, especially in Delhi, which is the capital, which comes under the influence of the central government to a great extent, there was a lot of pressure so that students that wanted to have even discussions on the question of Palestine had great difficulty in doing so. It ended up in many cases at central universities that they just had to have it informally outside, in which there was always the risk that the security guards would come in there, stop them and so on. But they did that. They couldn't even get classrooms in some cases. In other cases, certain members of the faculty or students very quietly were able to get classrooms, and you could have some kind of discussion there. What about state universities? Now, please understand this, which is very important. In the Indian House of Commons or the Lok Sabha, there are 37 political parties that have at least one MP. There are 37 political parties that are represented in the Lok Sabha. Around 30 of them, forget about calling for a ceasefire, around 30 of them have taken no position whatsoever on what has happened in Palestine, Israel. This is extraordinary. None of them. Insofar as you have states which are therefore ruled by these opposition parties or by coalitions of these opposition parties, apart from certain exceptions, Kerala, obviously, Ms. Fabian, we talked about here. What's the situation? In 3 states ruled by the BJP, and they rule many more, the situation is terrible, and one of the speakers will be speaking about that. The UP, Gujarat, Assam. Why is it that 30 out of 37 non-BJP parties are not prepared to take any kind of stand? I'm not about here. And that is because it's connected to the sense that to even talk about the Palestine issue would be detrimental to them electorally, politically, because it would feed into this idea of minority appeasement. It's an indication in many ways of the kind of situation that has emerged over here. So they want to avoid it. Anyway, it's a foreign policy issue. Why bring it up? It doesn't really affect us so much, and so on. And the other discourse, of course, is the discourse of terrorism. Now, when you come to the private universities here, what has changed in the last 20, 30 years is that now 45% of universities in India are private. Among those private universities, you have a whole host of them which are specific to getting professions, the medical profession, engineering, business, and so on. They are not so much of a concern for the central government and for the political parties as those which have a significant social science disciplinary framework, social sciences and history. Because it is in the social sciences and history that what you learn has a much more direct connection with social ethics. If you like, you study the laws of nature, and of course all sorts of things emerge, and of course there's a question of ethics there as well, but you don't argue with the laws of nature. But in the social sciences, what you learn and what you come to believe automatically, axiomatically connects to what others are learning and all. And in fact, social values, social norms, social cooperation and relations in larger society are shaped to a very considerable extent. Hence the importance of controlling that. Let me make one simple point. a democratic society must have democratic rights. Not all rights are democratic. Why is there a clash between different rights? The basic reason is you can have repressive rights, exclusivist rights, discriminatory rights, as well as progressive and humane democratic rights. This is connected to the question, rights clash because values clash. If you can shape values, you will be moving in the direction of getting the kind of rights that you want. So in the case of private universities here, among those that do have a very significant liberal arts format, even if it's for lawyers or whatever, influence on that is very important. It's not as easy as in the public universities, but there are all sorts of levers that the government uses to be able to try to influence them, to shape them and do that. And it is not entirely surprising that many of these, of course, cave in. It depends, of course, on the states, governments that they're in, or on the central government, in the case of many of these important big universities here. So they move much more, they want to avoid kind of conflict. And that's the kind of situation that really emerges here. And in India, the situation is getting worse on this issue. And this issue is also connected, of course, to the larger other domestic issues, because if you can push universities and all to become frightful and not to allow space for discussing on the Palestine-Israel issue, then it becomes easier to force them not to speak on things domestically as well. And look at the situation here in India and say, for example, in the United States, because you have all kinds of governments which are very supportive of Israel. The Indian government is very there. All of them pay lip service to the Palestinian cause, but basically they're much more preoccupied with strengthening their relations with Israel. And they are much more conducive to be influenced by what the Israeli embassy and the Israeli government says on various fronts. And what's happened? In the United States of America, you know what's happened at Harvard. Threat of donors not giving them has pushed Harvard to do that. You know what happened in Columbia? Two student bodies, the Students for Justice in Palestine and the Jewish Voices of Peace, were both suspended. But another group called SSI, Students Supporting Israel, were given a freer rein. In other universities in the United States, you have what are called the Chicago rules. These rules are, well, the university will not take any position on the Israel-Palestine issue or other political issues. You are free in the name of free speech to talk, but don't carry out actions. So, for example, there will be those who talk in favor of Palestine, those who talk in favor of Israel. But if you have students who are trying to recruit support within the universities for the BDS campaign, no. That's an action, and we cannot tolerate that, and then you will suffer a lot. But Chicago rules, you can speak here and there, and that's variable there. Where is that even in India? In India, Nivedita pointed out the IIT Bombay question. For them, they say no politics whatsoever. After a talk that did take place there, which was then trolled and attacked by the Hindutva right forces here, they say no politics, no. But of course, it doesn't really work, because indirect connections of all kinds, and they'll invite those which are acceptable to the government to come and speak or give awards and then give a talk, and all that sort of thing is taking place. How do we move out of this situation here? And here, of course, what you have, at least in Western Europe and the United States, is that you have had tremendous support for the Palestinian cause in civil society. In fact, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, two things took place worldwide. One was the shift of most governments, with some exceptions, to become closer to Israel. The other was a counterweight, especially in Western Europe, in North America, in certain countries of Southeast Asia, and a few maybe in Africa, of support of civil society, especially among a younger generation of Jews and others, in support of Palestine. And what has happened as a result of this support and the demonstration that we've had in the West, it's a constraining and restraining factor on the government to even try to attack very strongly the students and the faculty in the different universities. Of course, they're doing that, but it's a restraining factor, it's a controlling factor on them. We need to have that here in India. And I ask myself, is that why is it that in India, apart from certain places, of course, the left parties are, why is it that we've not been able to have that? Well, one thing, of course, is that in India, you have a whole livelihood problem for most people, but you now have a huge middle class. And it's actually everywhere. It's the middle class or sections of the middle class that are progressive and humane that play a very big role in promoting and developing international solidarities on foreign policy issues over here. In India, on what are considered to be foreign policy issues, the mass mobilizations have invariably been led by political parties or their fronts, their student fronts, their other fronts, and so on over here. We don't really have had the kind of significant sections of the Indian middle class which are prepared and committed simply on the basis of a kind of universalist humanism to understand the importance of this question of Palestine and so many other issues over here. And that's something that we have to generate. What I feel is that we have to try and develop that. And one thing that is happening as a result of this, the latest developments in Gaza, in the West Bank, Israel, is that despite the domination of the Indian public media, the English and vernacular languages, at least the Hindi and some other languages, and so, is that more and more people are getting a sense that this is something terrible and this is something wrong that is happening to the Palestinians. This is a profound injustice. And that is something that can spread. And what we need to do in India is to try to generate that kind of support and awareness on a much wider scale, which will in fact protect and promote the kind of struggles that can take place by students and others, very courageous students and faculty members, to also widen the space for criticism over there. How do we generate that awareness in various ways? Well, we have to keep on talking. We have to keep on trying to have mobilizations in various places. We want Palestinian cultural groups and Palestinian spokespersons to come to India. And we need to organize tours for them to go and speak in different parts of India and different places to get a generated sense. Even this government, because of its formal lip service to the Palestinians, would find it very difficult to prevent that from happening. And that is something that one has to use that space in a certain sense to also use to try to generate this kind of awareness. To me, the Palestinian cause is so blatant, you don't have to know much, you don't have to read. It is so blatantly the most incredible, obvious injustice that anybody can relate to. And because India has had was a former colony, the comparison between the settler colonial character of Palestine and the settler colonial history of India is something that people can relate to when you point it out to them here. The apartheid issue, of course, it is apartheid there. And many people will say that look at what's happening here in India as we move. So the struggle for justice for the Palestinians is very much connected to a struggle for greater justice in India. And that's something that we must try and work for and in every way continue. And those of us who are supportive of the Palestinian cause, we just have to carry on and we have to keep on. That's the least that we can do in support of the remarkable struggle of the Palestinian people. This is a remarkable people which has not always had the kind of leadership that they have deserved, but they are an inspiration to all of us. And this is one settler colonial state in which you will carry on from generation to generation the struggle, because this settler colonial state cannot end up like the first generation of settler colonial states in which they were able to ethnically cleanse or wipe out the whole population. That cannot happen. We live in times when that's not possible. And that's one very important source. And I want to end by saluting the Palestinian people for their immense courage and for the inspiration that they provide to all of us struggling for a better world and a better India. Thank you.
Thank you, Achin, both for pointing out the obstacles in the way for those of us in India who have always supported the Palestinian independence struggle against Israeli settler colonialism, the obstacles in our way, as well as the different kinds of strategies that we might need to use. Because I think in India, what we recognize very clearly is that the clampdown on the on expressions of solidarity towards Palestine is very closely linked to the authoritarianism of the Hindu supremacist regime that now rules us. And what we have found is that there are ways of speaking about Palestine. It's also very, very inspiring that young students who have actually never had the opportunity to learn about Palestine, they connect viscerally to the idea of a people fighting for their land. And wherever discussions are held informally in classrooms and so on, we find that students are invariably in support of the struggle of the Palestinian people. One such student is our next speaker, Atif Ahmed, who completed his graduation in political science and is currently pursuing MBA final year from Aligarh Muslim University. He is one of the students against whom a police first information report has been filed for protesting against the war on Gaza in Aligarh. Atif, over to you.
Thank you, Nivedita, for inviting me and giving me opportunity to shed light what's happening in the institution, academic institution like universities, on the students who are ready or willing to talk about the genocide happening in the Gaza, and speech freedom against Israel genocide on Palestine, which is currently difficult to discuss in the institutional academic institutions and universities. Though I would like to mention one thing, that central universities always has keen eye and shows their interest to raise the voices against the operations, whether it's on any individual or on any of the group. But currently, the scenario is supporting for Palestine is being treated as supporting for terrorism. You can see they can booked or jailed for raising voice against the genocide happening in Gaza or in Palestine. We students are the example of that. Along with us, there are many other students from different institutions all over the countries have booked and charged with this different cases. The police have filed the FIR against them. And one thing which we have noticed here is it's not the only BJP ruled states who have filed, who have booked the cases against those students. But along with other governments, ruling states like Hyderabad, like Telangana, and Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, these states have also filed the case. As we see, there were 11 students were booked in Hyderabad, IFLU University, English Foreign Language Universities. And in Karnataka on October, there were 16 students who were booked under the different charges for raising the voice and conducting a protest. And in our university on 8th of October, we conducted a protest in support of Palestine, where we did not used any anti-national slogans or any slogans which goes any of the against of any of the communities, but they charges us with the cases like 153A, 188,505, which includes creating hate against the different community and standing community against the other community. There were one more thing, that we took the permission to the proctor office of the university. They permitted us to conduct the protest, and along with the whole protest, the proctor's team was accompanied us. But what happens? Police charge us with the case that these students have not taken the permission of this protest. When we talk to the proctor team that we have taken the permission, given the application in the written, they said the police did not even confirm to the proctor team, and they filed the case in the night of the 9th of September. Along with me, there were 3 more students who charged with the same charges, who booked with the same charges. There were one more thing which were connected to the Aligarh Muslim University student. We have a student in Palestine, Palestinian student who studies here in Aligarh Muslim University. He pursued his PhD. He just went to his home in Palestine named as Murad. The Israeli force bombed his house along with 17 members. Murad bhai was the only one who survived. There were 16 people who met to their death in that genocide. Even the students did not dare to speak on behalf of the family of the Murad, just because of this fear that government has created within the students and in the institutions. If we see the history of the Aligarh Muslim University itself, this university has always raised the voice against in every genocide that's happening in India and all over the world. But what's happening nowadays, if as a professor has mentioned already, Professor Ashin, this government has making the students and this institution that they will not be able to talk about the internal conflicts of the country itself. They are directing the institutions even and every individual, whether it will be allowed or not, whether the government will decide whether the students will speak or not, the people of the country have any feeling or will show their solidarity or not. So if we see that the foreign policy of the India has always towards with the Palestinian, pro-Palestine, then too, this is the condition in the country that students, the people are not able to speak, though everyone believes that there's big genocide happening in Palestine and in Gaza. What people do, they just pray for that. But there is one thing which is very sad. A country like India, who itself has experienced the colonialism in the past, are not against the Israel who are trying to colonize Palestine in Gaza. This is very important to understand. And if we see why this is happening, this is just happening because in the last few years, the government and the government agencies, the government groups, they have created much hatred among the Muslims. So anything happening in the world, the Indian Hindutva government, they and the Hindutva mob who are supporting the government, they just go and support the group which is against the Muslim in all over the world. This is very important. All we are discussing in a country who has their foreign policy towards pro-Palestine, which is very shameful. And I think we should think where we stand now and in last few years where we have come. Is it the democracy? Is it the world's largest democracy where few students have gathered and talked about against the genocide happening in the Gaza and Palestine? The government is ready to book them and to jail them for showing their solidarity and expressing their views. That's what all I will say. Over to Nandini. Thank you.
Thank you, Atif, for your courage. Thank you for your brief presentation in which you have pointed out the connection between Hindutva in India and global Islamophobia. I hope you stand strong and that your idealism never wavers. I move on now to our final speaker on the panel, Ambassador K.P. Fabian, who served in the Indian Foreign Service from 1964 to 2000. His last posting was as ambassador to Italy and permanent representative to the UN in Rome. His latest book is The Arab Spring That Was and Wasn't. Mr. Fabian is a distinguished fellow at Symbiosis and professor at the Indian Society of International Law. Mr. Fabian, I hand over to you now.
Mr. Fabian, please unmute yourself.
Thank you, Nivedita, and good evening to all my friends. I'm sorry I didn't unmute myself because I was under the wrong impression that it is all controlled from the center. And now, thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this. And as I was listening to all the previous speakers, and I agree with all that has been said, especially that this is not a war, Israel-Hamas war, as the media in India and elsewhere, especially in the West, put it. It is actually a genocide. And anyone who has any doubt about it can check up Article 2 of the 1948 Convention to prevent genocide and to punish genocide. Now, the thing is this, the United States, which has the means, does not want to prevent the genocide, nor does it want to punish the genocide. In other words, the United States, which proclaims all the time that it is for a rule-based international order, well, it depends who is breaking the rule. Now, the second one thought that occurred to me is that, I was reminded of Francis Bacon, 16th century, Novum Organum, who spoke about the 4 types of idols. Idols of the cave, of the tribe, marketplace, and of the theater. Now, coming to idols of the marketplace, the media is, for most of us, the only source of information. And then I am reminded of Goebbels, who has an increasing number of disciples, not only in India, but elsewhere in the world. And Goebbels said, the media is sort of a grey keyboard for the government to play. So, in India and elsewhere too, the government makes use of the media, and what is happening is that we are told, sources say, quote unquote, So, I'm mentioning this because we are talking about academic freedom. Now, academic freedom is part of freedom of expression. Now, you can have freedom of expression only if you have access to reasonably reliable information. And that, as we know, is lacking. Now, coming to, in Delhi, I should say, because Achin mentioned about the middle class. Well, the middle class in Delhi is hardly interested in what is happening elsewhere. We have become very egocentric, Indo-centric. We speak of Vasudevaika Kudumbakam. Well, we don't really mean it. When it comes to Rohingyas, well, even we violate even our constitution. Anyway, now, first of all, we have to understand why is it happening. As we all have agreed, it is a genocide. Now, the genocide is happening because I have written about it, and my position is that Netanyahu is imitating Hitler while Biden is sleepwalking. He is probably sleepwalking to electoral defeat next year. And why does he do that? I suppose because he is a candidate also. He's not only the president. Anyway, let's leave it at that. I have been asked to say something about Kerala. Now, Kerala has shown much more interest in what is happening in Palestine. And in fact, the other day, was it about 2 weeks ago, law students from Government College Ernakulam and also law students from Government College Thiruvananthapuram reached out to me and wanted me to speak on this matter. Well, I was very, very sort of happy to speak to them, and I could see that at least some of them were taking the trouble to understand what is happening. Now, there are other reasons why Kerala takes more interest, and that is historical. As we all know, Jews and Muslims came to Kerala first. Jews came after the destruction of the temple, I think AD 70, and Kochi has a synagogue. I myself had a Jewish teacher at Maharaja's College. Now, also, there is a contemporary reason, and that is that about 35 lakhs of Keralites are in West Asia. Moreover, scholars in Kerala, for example, Muhammad Kanu, he published a paper or a book, The Palestine Prashnam. Prashnam means problem. And that was in 1930. You can calculate how many years before Israel was established by a United Nations resolution. Incidentally, Israel, which was established thanks to a United Nations resolution, has been showing utter contempt to the United Nations. As we have seen, the Israeli foreign minister asked in public the Secretary General to resign. He cancelled an appointment with the Secretary General. He threatened not to issue any visa to UN officials. And we also know Israel has killed more than 100, probably 113 right now, but it's a mounting toll of UN staff. It has bombed UN schools. It has bombed UN camps. So that is how a state which was born out of a UN General Assembly resolution is treating the UN. Now, coming back to Kerala, apart from Muhammad Kanu, I want to mention another name, that is Wakam Muhammad Abdul Qadir Maulavi. Now, he also, way back 1905 and all that, he has been writing on this matter, on Palestine, and regularly, from time to time, Professor K.M. Siti I used to know him when I was at Mahatma Gandhi University holding the KPS Menon Chair, arranges memorial lectures. So that is where we are. Now the question is, Achin asked, what can we do? Now, let me try to answer that question. I don't think I have got the full answer. It's a part answer. We in India have an election coming up. We have some elections which have happened, in the states, but we have a general election coming up. Now, as we all know, democracy implies an electorate which is intelligent and responsible. So I'm not for any political party or against any political party. So I will never tell anyone vote for this party or vote against that party. But what I want to tell the voters, especially the young voters, is that when the candidate comes to you seeking your vote, please ask a few searching questions, including what is your idea, what is your thought about what happened about the genocide, and what have you done about it? And if elected, what will you do about it? You see, if we ask that question, and then depending on the answer, we can decide whether to vote for that person or not. And one more point. Some people have propagated the idea that the general election is for electing a prime minister. Sorry, India does not have a presidential system. India has a parliamentary system. So we are all voting for, not for PM, but for MP, Member of Parliament. And the members of Parliament will elect the PM. So once again, the electorate has to be intelligent and responsible. Thank you so much for listening to me, and thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Fabian, for giving us a sense of why Kerala would have actually seen one of the largest protests in India recently, 200,000 people in Kozhikode. There's a long history of Kerala with West Asia, as you pointed out. There's a history of left politics. And thank you for giving us a glimpse of that. I will now hand over to our friends and colleagues at INSAF to conduct the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Nivedita. My name is Shruti Bala. I'm part of INSAF India, and I would like to, invite anyone who would like to ask a question to do so. You can do that by either writing it in the chat. There's a Q&A function, or if you prefer to just speak it out, you can use the raise hand button so we know that you are interested in asking a question. And while I'm waiting for people to do that, yes, I see Annapurna, welcome. Please go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, thank you so much. Thank you to INSAF and to all the speakers for being very informative while also stressing on the urgency of the whole situation. I think my question was for May, the Palestinian speaker. I wanted to ask, so when I was in Palestine recently, and there was a lot of conversation around Palestinian students who have to or decide to go to universities in Israel, like Hebrew University. And during the beginning of this whole thing, we did hear backlash against Palestinian students in these universities. And I was wondering if you might be able to elaborate a bit on what their conditions are like, or if there's any news of how their education is or how they are doing. So yeah, thank you.
May, would you like to directly respond to that now while the other people may also be collecting their questions?
Sure. Thank you very much for the question. I just want to give a little bit of background. So some Palestinians, particularly those who live in Jerusalem or in lands of 1948, go to Israeli universities because if they go to Palestinian universities, they're unable to be employed where they live. So they are forced to go to these universities while they're being very much silenced in general, not only now, but in general, they're silenced. They're not allowed to show their Palestinian identities. There's a crackdown always on Palestinian students in these spaces. In addition to the fact that they know for a fact they're going to universities that are built on Palestinian mass graves. For example, the Sheikh Mounnis or Tel Aviv University is based on a Palestinian village that was completely destroyed by the Israeli military in 1948. So the fact that they go there is torture in itself, but they have no other options, and the crackdown is ongoing. These crackdowns are more physical and violent and torturous when resistance is happening in Palestine. So there is that kind of correlation where the heightened crackdown is happening as resistance is intensifying. Currently, for these 100 students that I know about, I don't know what their positions are, but I know a lot of them were suspended, as well as some academics, particularly Professor Nadia Kovrikian. And there is Adala, which is a Palestinian human rights organization in 1948, is taking some of the cases of these students and academics to court to kind of reinstate them. Now, I don't know exactly what's happening with that, but if you go to the Adala website, you could see where the proceedings are.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, May, for sharing this. I mean, clearly listening to you, it's obvious how there's so many dimensions also in terms of Palestinian experiences. You spoke about not just, the differences across West Bank and Gaza and Palestinians living within the territories of Israel, but also the Palestinians in diaspora, the ones in Jordan and Lebanon and other countries, and elsewhere around the world. So, thinking about the question of Palestine is not just thinking about the question of what is happening incidentally in one place and time, but systematically across many, many different areas and places. So I would like to invite others who have, I have questions to ask myself as well, but perhaps the panelists, different panelists would like to ask each other questions as well to begin with. If any of you would like to do so, please indicate or unmute yourself.
Yes.
Achin, please go ahead.
I'd like to ask Mia.
My.
There's a view now that the best thing which could connect the Palestinians within Israel, 67 borders, and those in the occupied territories and the diaspora, and also the public, which is very different from the governments in the neighborhood. And that uniform banner which could connect that struggle is for rights and equality. Rather than talk about two-state or whatever, just talk about rights and equality. Because within the Israel, they are fighting for greater equal rights. The same thing in and the diaspora, the right of return. So I think this could be one focus with different parts of the Palestinian population and within the Arab world, the public could connect with, because I see that the only possibility of a shift in the relationship of forces that could actually promote the Palestinian cause would be one of the dictators in the Arab world, if you like, were to fall. So I would like to know your response to this kind of an approach, and also Palestinians themselves must be also thinking different ways about what to do, and what is your general understanding of what is happening within the Palestinian struggles and those who are struggling.
Shall I answer?
Yes, please.
Yes, I don't speak for all Palestinians, of course, but I would just refer back to what happened in 2021 and the Intifada of Consciousness. That particular manifesto that I talked about, which is the Manifesto of Dignity and Hope, was a collective of Palestinians inside Palestine, river to sea, and in the diaspora, whether refugees or exile. Also, the BDS campaign is a campaign that is representative of all Palestinian civil society. So if we take these two as a core to the vision and the imaginary of the current struggle and the future struggle, is very unifying of the Palestinian people. What happened in the early 90s, which is called the Oslo Peace Accord, according to to a lot of Palestinian historians is worse than the Nakba, basically, because we've given up a lot of Palestinian rights that are inherent of being Palestinian, our land, our water, our refugees. And refugees are paramount to basically liberation of Palestinians. If there are no Palestinian refugees' right of return, then it will never be a solution. And for me, thinking about the two-state solution or one-state solution or a 100-state solution or a confederation with Jordan or whatever it is, or part of Egypt or Sinai, that for me, that's not a priority. The priority, I think, and for many, many Palestinians, and this thinking is becoming more stronger since 2021 and the Unity Intifada, is that what we need to think about and work towards is the de-Zionization and decolonization of the land of Palestine, river to sea. Once that happens, we think of political solutions. I feel it's pointless to think about political solutions and shapes of states, because also the statist approach is very colonial, and Palestinians need to think beyond that. Palestine is an opportunity. The liberation of Palestine is an opportunity to have our imaginary beyond the statist colonial approach. So once we de-Zionize and decolonize Palestine as a whole, we respect and fulfill the right of refugees to return, maybe at that time, we can think of hopefully more just and inclusive solutions of people who are living in Palestine and those who should return.
If I could just, ask you a little further to explain how should we understand de-Zionize and decolonize? What would that concretely mean outside of state-based thinking?
So basically, there are so many ways to think about it, but in terms of, land back, refugees back, ending all military rules, basically end of all colonial manifestations that are happening in Palestine, and ending the the system of Zionism, which is a discriminatory and racist kind of political system that gives privilege and supremacy to it becomes a Jewish state where Jews have the supremacy over Palestinians, both Muslims and Christians. So ending that supremacy, ending all manifestations of colonialism, that would be the de-Zionization and decolonization of Palestine. And of course, paramount, the return of Palestinian refugees, unconditional, and land back to Palestinians.
Yeah, thank you. I think that gives us something to think about also when we are translating how the playbook of what is happening in Israel and Palestine is copied in the Indian context a lot. I'd like to move on to other questions that have been posed over here. So in the Q&A, I think we can club together a few of these questions. Joseph Gerald asks, how can the Indian government help to de-escalate the issues between Israel and Palestine? So this is a question particularly about what we need to demand of the Indian government. Mr. Fabian, would you like to respond to this one?
Thank you. Well, first let's understand what is Government of India's position. On the 7th of October, Prime Minister Modi tweeted, and we know what he tweeted. Then External Affairs Ministry felt the need to correct that rather unbalanced response from the Prime Minister to what happened on the 7th of October. Well, External Affairs Ministry had to struggle hard to get the green signal from the PMO, and after 4 or 5 days, External Affairs Ministry came up with a statement reinstating India's long-held position for a state of Palestine. Then subsequently at the United Nations, India has not supported resolutions calling for a ceasefire. In other words, though India claims to be the leading voice of the global South, in this matter, India is not speaking for the global South. So that is what it is. And even as regards the clarification issued by the Ministry of External Affairs, I should like to add that if I were a foreign ambassador in Delhi, I would have told my government, well, this is what the Prime Minister has said. This is what MEA has said after 4 days. Now, MES is what is called a damage control. The real position of India is the one which was sort of given by the Prime Minister. So that is where we are. Now the question is whether we as people can compel our government to change its position. Well, the government has, in a manner of speaking, changed its position from the position given by the Prime Minister. But I should imagine that these are all sort of, what shall I say, damage control, and that the Prime Minister's position, as stated on the 7th of October, remains. Now, again, I go back to what I said. If you want to change government's position, you as voter have to speak out. And you speak out to your MLA, to your MP, and to the other political leaders. Then, one other thing we can do as people is to send 1 million emails to the Prime Minister's office. Can we do that?
Okay, we're left there with a challenge there to see if our pressure on our representatives will be the way to address our governments and to hold them accountable for the policy. Thank you, Mr. Fabian. So, Achin, perhaps you could address the next questions. So there's one question which is about what your take is on the one-state solution. Perhaps here you could respond to what May has already been saying earlier on. And the second question to you specifically is from S. Geetanjali, who asks, what's your opinion on approaching the courts, particularly the Supreme Court, on the right to protest?
Well, if I take the second question first, that's all very well, but it's not really going to help very much unless there is a kind of support structure and a massive mobilization with regard to specific laws. For example, you have the UAPA, which enables the government to be able, in the name of something that is likely to cause a problem for national security, this, that, whatever, terrorism, to actually take you in. So you have existing flexibility within these laws, which are colonial laws in many ways, for people to for the government to, if you try to protest and so on. The only way to really change it is that you have a massive protests and you have a significant change of government, a combination of these two things, which could then pressurize the Supreme Court to actually make changes. Don't expect this Supreme Court to otherwise make significant changes here. It's not going to do that. So this is a larger issue. On the question of the one state, two state, it's for the Palestinians to decide. And there are differences within the Palestinians about this question of two state, one state here. I put forward what I consider a transitional perspective, which everybody, and me, I think, I believe also endorses that, and that is the fight for rights and equality. And I agree with her about the whole question of actually moving towards de-Zionization and decolonization. What does this actually mean? It means, in a sense, that you have to have a longer-term vision of moving away from the idea that a Zionist Israel and a Palestinian rump of some kind can just coexist together, because the problem is Zionism itself. Yeah, and this is something that is to change the direction, whether in the direction of more feasible two-state or a one-state. I'm inclined very much more to a one-state perspective. Is the question of shifting the relationship forces. And if you like, what I'm saying is that you will have to actually direction or the route towards greater support for the Palestinian cause worldwide would go through Cairo or Jordan or one of the other UAE countries in dictatorships that they fall. That could actually make a tremendous change to the kind of situation, which would force even governments to think much more seriously about that. I also believe that you cannot defeat Israel militarily. And even if there's a place for self-defense, one has to think in terms of a mobilized, basically non-violent political strategy. I'm very embarrassed to say this, because even if this is to take place, Israel will react ruthlessly. And it is easy for me to say this. But of course, there are also Palestinians who say this here. It's not for me to advise. I will just end by saying one thing: the right of return. The right of return remains absolutely fundamental. 1948 Nakba. What does that mean? What that means, and this is connected to the question of de-Zionization. It's not so much that everybody in the diaspora must come back. You can negotiate the kind of compensation that be paid, the numbers of people who might want to come back or whatever. But the central political issue is that Israel must accept a principle of the right of return. Why? Because the right of return and accepting that principle is a recognition that the very formation of Israel was a profound injustice toward other people. You cannot have new relations between the colonized and the colonizer unless the colonizer accepts that colonialism was wrong. You cannot have a new relationship between white and non-white people in apartheid South Africa unless they accept that apartheid was wrong. The problem for the Zionists and for so many Jews is that they see the formation of Israel as a rectification of a historical injustice done to them, but not by the Palestinians. But it was simultaneously, even if you consider that to be the case, it was simultaneously a profound injustice to the Palestinian people. And unless they accept this, how on earth can they be there? Therefore, the central issue is, to me, this question of how do we move towards that? Mia also made the point. Open question, problems of nationalism, confederation of Arab states, all that is there. Transitional point, maybe a two-state sometime here, but if you're really talking about a much more humane existence, etc., we have to move towards the goal of de-Zionization. Otherwise, you will continue to have. And that's a larger struggle everywhere against exclusivist forms of and discriminatory forms and recognition of the profound injustice. So I'm more in favor of talking about apartheid. Settler colonial apartheid, fight for equal rights, fight for justice. And of course, all of these things.
Okay, thank you very much, Achin. So there's a question which I would like to ask Atif, if you would like to respond to Atif. This is from Radhika Japtak, who says, as I teach in one of the private law schools and my subjects being international law, among others, I'd like to mention that mainstream literature, textbooks and syllabi have very less to offer on theorization of people's historical resistances and realities. How do we sensitize the students? Atif, would you like to speak to this question of the place and how in your education you see or do not see or see an absence, or how we'd like to address this absence of sensitization on questions of people's struggles, oppressions, and realities? You need to unmute yourself. Atif, somehow the sound is cutting out and I see that your mic is muted. Can you please unmute?
No, my
I think Atif has just dropped out of the session. I don't see the screen anymore. Yes, while we are waiting, would one of you like to speak to this question? I think it's really quite important. The question of how to bring this into. Now, Atif, you are back.
Shruti, am I audible?
Yes.
Yes, definitely. We see the students have very less opportunity to study all these things. And in the universities, it was very good way to educate the students by by having discussions, group discussions, and awareness programs. But after these, which has happened in a month, the students are not willing to talk on these issues, like important issues, because of which many other students who should get aware of the things, they are not getting proper, which they should reach out. So this is very important. Indian government should think about it And the thing is, our education system has a very single way opportunity to get the job, and what they're teaching in the class. Students are not getting full information in the class, but in the central universities and institutions like universities, there are opportunities which this government has suppressed. This government has targeted to suppress these.
Atif, you are cutting out, or you are finished. I'm not entirely sure, but the last sentence was cutting out. Yeah, okay. I think we would need to leave it there at that. We've reached the now end of the time which was proposed on the program. However, there are 2-3 more questions, and if it's okay with you, I would like to take another 5 minutes to just go through them and respond to these. Thomas Matthew asks in the chat, has a question to Mr. Fabian and also to Professor Vinayak. There's another question to Mr. Fabian. Maybe you could take both of these together. So the first question is, I want to know how far an external embassy, in this case that of Israel, could go about meddling with institutions in India. Has this ever happened in India's diplomatic history? And the second question was relating to the asking you to elaborate on the seeming consensus around this genocide. And also, could you reflect on why this consensus appears to be breaking down? This is from Karen Gabriel. So, Mr. Fabian, if you could take these 2 questions.
Thank you.
In brief.
The first question, you can hear me, no?
Yes.
Thank you. Coming to the first question, the Israeli embassy is very active, and an editor told me the other day that he has to be very careful in publishing articles on this matter, because he believes that if Israeli embassy makes an approach to government of India, then action might be taken against him. So there is a, what shall I say, there is a fear. And also, you know, Israeli embassy has been active otherwise, but I will not blame them for being active, because an embassy is supposed to act to protect the interests of its state. So I wouldn't blame the Israeli embassy, but I would ask the question whether it is correct on the part of government of India to yield to such pressure and, you know, give the impression to the media, especially the editors, that they are not free to say what they want to say. So the fault is not of the embassy, but of the government. Now, coming to the second question, my view is that that it is genocide that is happening is gaining ground. It is not losing ground. The latest is that the Spain is going to recognize, unless it has already done so, the state of Palestine. And Belgium has asked for an immediate ceasefire, and I believe Israel is planning to withdraw its ambassadors from these 2 countries. So basically what is happening, which is genocide, is getting recognized. And even in the United States, you know, there is a growing number of Americans who recognize that Biden is, as I said earlier, punching below his weight, and he is sleepwalking.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Fabian. Achin, the last question here to you is also in the Q&A from Thomas Matthew. For a right-wing government that rides on an overwhelming concern for the nation's sovereignty, why are Israel embassy's actions not condemnable? This kind of falls in line with the previous question as well. And maybe you would like to also speak to the question of how to integrate more awareness and into the syllabus, into our mainstream literature textbooks and what's being taught in the university, if you would like to speak to that as well.
Thank you. No, as regards what Government of India is doing in the matter, we have to understand that, let me put it this way. For India, relations with Israel are important for many reasons, including defense, meaning arms and technology. Okay? In fact, let me just share a story with you. Once when Prime Minister Gujral came to Rome, we were chatting and he told me that on day one, he asked the question, why do we have such keenness to promote relations with Israel? So he said that the next day, they put so many files on his table. And he said, but tell me what? So the answer was, sir, we can get American technology from Israel, even if the Americans have said no to us. Okay, so I agree that it's important for us to keep our relations with Israel in good repair. But it doesn't follow that we have to support Israel in every case. And diplomacy is the art of dancing with more than one partner at a time.
Okay, thank you. Achin, would you like to speak to these questions as well, as, and we can conclude after that?
Gotcha. Well, on the question of changes in the syllabus and curriculum, of course, that presupposes that there will be a change either at the state government level or at the central level, in a way in which, along with pressure from below and from teachers and faculty and students, for a rectification of the direction in which the curriculum is going on a whole host of issues, much more to the right. So that's part of a larger struggle. You're not going to be able to make significant changes there unless there's pressure from below, within the institutions, and even wider, so as to change the kind of government that is existing and to put pressure on that. And that can take place at the state level as well. So where there are also chances of having a much more progressive governments there. The other question was on, can you just remind me, what was the other question that I'm supposed to answer?
So the question was about, condemnation of Israel embassy's actions from the Indian government side.
Well, you're not going to get a condemnation. You're going to get basically the Indian government, like so many other governments, as far as the Palestinian issue is concerned, they're just going to give lip service and money to the Palestinian Authority and to UN agencies like UNRWA. That's basically the line they want, and they want to consolidate their relationship with Israel. My own view, of course, which is different from Mr. Fabian, is that the left position of the left parties is to cut military relations. My own view is, of course, that one should even go beyond that if you consider apartheid. But the question of cutting military relations we consider important is intimately connected to an Indian perspective about what India wants to be in terms of a military power. Every country has a choice between either wanting to power project or to defend its territory. There's a profound difference, and it varies. It's not the size of the country that matters, it's the thinking of the ruling elite and of the general foreign policy elite. For example, Brazil is a very big country, but is not concerned about developing enough military power to power project and to dominate others. A country like Vietnam that needs no lessons from any of us of how to fight for defense of its territory and for its unification against the most powerful country doesn't want to power project. It wants, of course, those islands that China is housing here. A country like Sweden doesn't want to power project, but of course, to defend itself. There's the same choice with India or with Pakistan, any country. Do you want to have enough to defend militarily your territory, or do you want to power project? Unfortunately, in India, you have an Indian government that wants to power project, and therefore its need, so-called need in quotes, for military equipment, for this, that, etc., becomes much greater than beyond that. So this is one particular question. The irony is that India is and will remain, despite all its arrogances, despite whether it's the UPA government or the NDA government wanting India to become a great power, India cannot even become a significant regional power because of the problem it has with both Pakistan and China. And the irony is that all of these powerful governments that talk about dominating the world and protecting ourselves and power projection, etc., in fact, are unable to deal with the reality of the world order, which is moving in a much more chaotic direction, and the kind of problems that we should be addressing of inequalities, of income and wealth, of mass poverty, of ecological dimension, of nuclear disarmament, of the rise of far-right forces, etc., which require international cooperation, are not happening. You have individual governments striving to do this and being advised that this is the only way we have to be forward, we'll be strong, we'll be this, that, etc. So there has to be a much larger transformative agenda on the specific issue of the military relationship here. Let me just point one thing out. Israel is not a nation with an army. It's an army with a nation. Its army is not just so important militarily, it's very important economically. Do you know that in 2022, Israel's sales of military equipment got them in 2022 $12 billion, and its sale of cybersecurity related equipment got them $8 billion. In fact, one struggle that we have to take up is against the surveillance state that is developing in India, which also connects to the Pegasus issue here. So it's there. Politically, no party, no non-Arab party in Israel will put restraints on the army. You cannot dominate for 75 years and think that the civilian control over the army is the most dominant thing. In many ways, it's the other way around. And of course, this whole question of conscription, permanent, they don't need it. They have a most powerful, but this myth of the perpetual victimhood of Israel is something that we have to fight against here. I mean, this is ridiculous. They have a professional army, which is a match for all the armies put together of their neighboring countries. They have nuclear weapons. They're backed by the most powerful state, military state in the world, and they go on and on about their existential crisis and this, that, etc. And this is something that we have to expose, and we have to attack the Indian government for not being prepared to recognize this nonsense. And at least what we can try to do is to expose as much as we can. To expose in order to fight to change the awareness of people outside of government. Because the government itself will only change if you shift the relation of forces. I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you very much for that clear message, Dr. Vinay.
Can I just say something?
Yes, I was in fact going to invite you, having listened into this whole talk around the Indian situation, and if you would like to offer your concluding thoughts, and then we need to wrap up.
Thank you very much. I think a lot of things have been said and I've learned so much. And I think I just want to comment on a couple of points in terms of curricula and education within universities and the move to the far right across the world, which means the silencing of Palestinian knowledge and Palestinian academics and talk about Palestine in classrooms. I've been working with Palestinian students in the UK, and students who go to doing their master's degrees or PhDs or even undergrads in law, international law, political science, sociology, history, when the issue of Palestine comes up in the classroom, they're being silenced immediately because under the pretext that it's controversial, it makes other people uncomfortable, or that these students are becoming too violent or emotional when they're discussing. So they're being silenced under these tropes. So even if the classroom is censored, there are other ways to do it. For example, making the reading lists a little bit more flexible and giving pointers to students to go into different kind of alternative literature, connect with other students groups around the world who are talking about Palestine and engaging in online teach outs. For example, Layla is leading on the Decolonial Cafe, for example, the Theater of the Privilege, which we run online. Sometimes some students can engage in that, doing alternative reading groups for students outside of the university campuses since there's surveillance. So there's ways to go around that to get them out of the institution and be able to be exposed to that alternative literature. Now it's becoming alternative literature, unfortunately. In terms of arms, I completely agree with Action, and thank you very much for bringing that out. It is an army with people around it. So the whole idea of civilians is very problematic and needs to be taken very much, critically, because there's also illegal settlements where settlers are there and they're not supposed to be there. So how do we deal with all of this? In terms of arms are not only being produced by the Israeli factories and government and pushed to be sold around the world, but they're being sold as tested. You know what that means? They're tested on Palestinians, and the countries around the world buy Israeli weapons because they are tested on Palestinian bodies and currently in south of Lebanon. So, I mean, what kind of ethical collapse is this that we are witnessing in the world that makes governments buy weapons because they're tested on human beings, and their pride in that? Our universities in the UK are complicit in arms deals with the Israeli government. So being in that kind of environment, not only in institutions that are entrenched within colonial values, but also that are systematically and actively engaged of killing of Palestinians. So these are the 2 points that I wanted to highlight. Thank you. Thank you for the space and for the discussion. I learned a lot. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much, May, for sharing your thoughts. I think there are also important resources which have been pooled together. There are lists and Google Docs with overviews of various films, readings, texts, which we can surely share around as well, so that we can all kind of disseminate these in our own networks. We need to conclude this session now. There's much that we can talk about, and we do need to talk about. We need to continue this conversation within the Indian context, within the context of Indian academics and academics all around the world. The May's point about education and intellectual labor being an important part of the struggle, as a lesson also from Palestinian resistance from several decades, is I think a crucial one to take away for all of us. So as we leave, we wanted to play a song, and this song is based on a poem by the Pakistani poet Faiz Ahmed Faiz. It's called A Lullaby for the Children of Palestine, and it's been composed and sung by Dastan Live, a rock band in India. So stay on to listen to the song, and otherwise as well, we hope to continue to be in touch.
I just want to say Azad Philistine Zindabad.